Hi all, Tom here. So in today's video I want to share what Hayao Miyazaki thought about the train scene in Spirited Away and what he wanted to do but never did. I'll be using two books for reference and hope that the following questions can be answered. Number 1, what he thought about the train scene. 2, what he thought about the passengers. And 3, what is the image that he wanted so bad in the scene. Sometime last year I went to a Japanese bookstore and asked if there were any books on Hayao Miyazaki, and the clerk brought me 2 books. One was book 1 of Nausicaa's manga set, and then she handed me this other little book, titled Bug Eye and Annie Eye. The pronunciation of the kanji characters are like this. The kanji character I is pronounced as me, so the title of this book can be read as Mushime and Anime. It's a play on words and I thought that it's a cool title. So the book is an interview conducted between Takeshi Yoda and Mr. Miyazaki. It's a book that covers topics on Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away, and the second reference I'll use is this book titled Ghibli's Forest and Ponyo's Ocean, an interview with writer Robert Whiting. I think every Ghibli fan has seen the train scene at least a couple times, but what may not be widely known is that Kenji Miyazawa's Night on the Galactic Railroad had a defining influence on the scene and also a good part of Spirited Away in terms of thematic elements. And I believe Kenji Miyazawa influenced a lot of writers and artists of Miyazaki and Takahata's generation. You can see Kenji Miyazawa mentioned a couple times in both books, Starting Point and Turning Point. So to get into Mushime and Anime, Mr. Yoda makes a comment on the train scene, and here Mr. Miyazaki replies on what he thought about the scene. Yoda: I was really impressed with the train scene in Spirited Away. It was running through the water. Miyazaki: in the film I was overjoyed to create a scene that had Sen inside a train. That scene ultimately became the climax of the film. It's amusing to think that the climax of the film is a scene where nothing really happens. I was happy to know that if water did remain after the rain, I can create a world where there could be an ocean. I didn't know at the time, but somewhere in the recesses of my brain, I would create an ocean so Sen can ride through water. Although the ocean is there were many thoughts that went through my mind, like whether it was possible to have a train run through water, or how would the waves look like when the train runs on the tracks. When I finally figured this part out, it was a relief. All the staff were delighted knowing that the train scene would mark the closing of the film. The reason for their joy was because they finally got confirmation that the film was going to end. From my point of view as a director, I was happy to end the film in that kind of way. I didn't have to settle with an ending where No-Face destroys a bathhouse, chases after Sen to her parents' pigpen, and to have Haku rush to her side to save the day. Generally, this would be the sequence that would normally come to mind. It's the cheapest kind of method, because that's typically how entertainment is supposed to be. It seems here that Mr. Miyazaki was deeply searching for a good way to end the story, but had creator's block. And I'm sure he had conversations with the people around him and got some good ideas that formed the scene. Towards the end of his conversation with Mr. Yoda, he said that the direction of the train scene was more important than continuing with No-Face's rampage inside the bathhouse. I wonder how we would have felt about the film if it had a different climax. This is a topic that is something I didn't pay too much attention to. Why are the passengers shadows? I think it's because I've already set my mind to the fact that the people are actually spirits, or of the dead. But here's what Mr. Miyazaki said about that. Furthermore, if I were to draw an eye and nose and put color into the passengers around Sen, visually we may get emotionally involved with those passengers when the scene doesn't really need it. I don't really like doing that needlessly. For the child in reality, they may have just looked like shadows to him or her. If you remember in your past when you wrote something for the first time, or felt nervous about something, you probably can't recall what was in your surroundings. I racked my mind on how to portray a scene where you couldn't remember your surroundings. In short, in that world, people are shadows. Of course, that is just part of my logic. Perhaps if Sen sees them as shadows, then in turn, they must see her as a shadow as well. If I explained it like this, some members of the staff would unnecessarily become convinced of this. So I just communicated that we needed to create a scene, depicting the feeling of excitement when getting onto a train for the first time, and that the surrounding passengers were like shadows with indistinct faces. But as the person drawing the shadows, I am emotionally involved in them. My image of them as I draw them is of Romanian men dragging their heavy shoes, coming back from some type of migrant work. But I think I was able to draw the scene clearly from Sen's perspective. The outside is all ocean, and the passengers are shadows. I thought this explanation was really interesting. He was not referring to the shadows as entities of the world that she belonged to, but rather how Sen actually saw them. So the last question is, what were Miyazaki's idea for the scene that didn't transpire? He said himself that he wanted the scene to be longer, but due to the structure of the film, it was simply not possible. In this conversation with Mr. Yoda, he even said that he had to swallow his tears and throw away his proposed scene. And to this day, when the interview was conducted, he sometimes wonders if it was possible to include the scene in there. I'll shift to the other book, Ghibli's Forest and Ponyo's Ocean, where Mr. Whiting asked Mr. Miyazaki the question of if there were any works that he would have liked to fix or redo, like Spirited Away. Miyazaki: for Spirited Away, let's see. There was one. There's a scene when Sen gets onto the train, right? The reason why I wanted her to get on the train is so I can create a scene where she ended up falling asleep. When she suddenly awakes, she realizes that it's already evening and darkness envelops around her, and all she can see are the shadows of the passing town squares from her window. The train just leaves another station. She has no idea what station number she just passed and where she is. As she gets up in a hurry, the town she saw disappears in the pitch. She's worried and walks to the train conductor's compartment and knocks on the door. No one answers. She works up the courage and opens the door, only to find the town lights floating in the pitch black sky like a nebula. And this image is drawn on a flat glass that is laid down and is slowly turning and moving away. This part I wasn't sure how to translate. I couldn't figure out the image that he had in his head. But if I were to guess, it would look something like the scene from the Galactic Railroad, but instead having the glass slowly turning. Miyazaki was quite vocal about his disappointment in this dialogue with Mr. Yoda. He continued, "That is my image of the night of the Galactic Road. I really wanted to put that in. It was immensely difficult to resist. But as I was drawing the storyboard, we just simply couldn't add it to the film. I thought of everything to include the image into the scene. But in the end, it just didn't work. I did everything, but it didn't fit. Ultimately, the number one scene that I wanted to do in the film was pushed to the wayside. The reason to even have the train scene in the first place was to do that part, but sadly we couldn't make it work. I realized that this jigsaw puzzle piece was actually for the wrong puzzle. I spent an inordinate amount of time on this single realization." Okay, so that's it. I hope I brought some clarity to those 3 questions. For you who have subscribed to my channel, I thank you, and it's great to hear your comments. It gives me more motivation to know that there's a community out there that thinks about these things as much as I do. I hope to see you in the next video. See ya!